A steady rain fell from the skies. Kurama sat there, his hand clutching his hair. To his left was a gun, and to his right was a letter with the words "The boss is dead" scrawled on it so fast that it seemed like it was to be the last thing ever written by its author. Kurama looked down into the reflection of his face in the drink in his hand. The most heavy of bourbons, something to kill all feelings. Outside the window, Konoha was burning. Explosions in the distance could be heard. His empire was falling. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Welcome to the Amagi. Before we begin, only 25% of our viewers are subscribed, so if you're a fan of the video, please like and double check if you are subscribed. And with that out of the way, let's get into the video. Kurama woke up early in the morning, his dreams plagued by that darned fox. Please, you need to get off this road, Kurama. If you continue to walk the path of darkness, darkness is all you'll find. If you act as a villain, then a villain's fate you'll find. You already know this is truth, but death follows you everywhere, and if you don't change your ways, death will be the only companion left for you once you too are claimed by it. Please, heed my warning. I beg you. Kurama was in his office getting his work done early. Perhaps later on today, if I have enough time, I can go out with the boys and do something fun. Get the spirits up. The family simply hadn't been the same since Yusuke passed. So many good men were lost that day, so many deaths. And while they had seen quite a bit of payment from collecting so many bounties at once, money was no bandage that could heal wounds left behind. It seemed that money wasn't everything. There were things it couldn't buy, and one of those things seemed to be emotional healing. The money was bitter to them. Every time anyone looked at that stack of cash, the only thing they could think of was the death of Yusuke. It wasn't like Kurama didn't know this stuff could happen. Frankly, the nine tails inside of him was right. When you played with fire, you got burned. When you lived by the sword, you died by it. But it wouldn't be called life if you could just get out of it alive. Eventually, all men died. The question was how and when. For Yusuke, it was far too early. Just a few days after his 16th birthday. But that was life, and they had to move on. Kurama had basically buried his men in work. Idle hands did the devil's work, and by devil he meant the evil entity that wasn't Kurama himself, though the two oft were confused for one another. It seemed cruel. Nobody had a chance to catch their breath, but that was the point. He didn't want his men to be able to catch their breath, because if they tried, they would dwell, and if they dwelled, the wound would never heal. From Kurama's experience, for a mental wound, much like the physical, thinking about it was basically the same as picking at a scab. Maybe it felt good in the moment, but in the long run, it would make a scar, and the healing process would never truly complete. For now, it was best to forget about Yusuke. When their hearts weren't shattered, then they could think about him. But now, no thinking was allowed, only action. For Konoha, this made things a lot worse. The entire family's patience had been lowered. Forgiveness for late payments was a thing of the past, and enforcers had a tendency to do a bit more than just bruise your ribs. The frustrations of the family were being taken out on the village, which led to Kurama's empire seeing a little stability problem. The more trouble they made, the more they hurt people, the more the eye of Danzo was turned in their direction. The only thing Kurama could do was turn his business to Danzo's favor in secret, make himself an asset. After killing Orochimaru, Sasuke, and eradicating what was left of Otogakure, they had gained favor. But keeping this favor was another issue. The more cruel they became, the more the crime rate would reflect on Danzo. The moment they became a liability, they'd become fresh wood to stoke the fires of Danzo's ambitions. Kurama knew how Danzo worked. Danzo himself was once the Shadow Hokage before he became the true one. His group, Root, was once an official organization who tended to break the law for the benefit of the village, and now that Danzo was in the light, more or less, Kurama was fulfilling that role he left behind. But only so long as he stayed on a very narrow path. He was walking a tightrope above a pack of hungry lions, and Yusuke's demise was causing that rope to shake. It became tougher and tougher remaining useful enough to exist in this village. At this point, he felt like he was banking on his notoriety. At least his group was keeping other gangs from forming, which left him as the necessary evil. As criminal as his organization was, he kept order. Kurama was the flea on the back of Konoha's hide, but he was a flea with purpose. Day in, day out though, he began to wonder how long that could carry him. Kurama began to wonder about how it could ever get any worse than this. That was until Josuke walked into the room. "Boss, I have a letter to you from the Land of Waves." Kurama took it and looked at it. The letter was stamped with the sigil of Gato himself, his own ring pushed into the sealing wax. It was a private correspondence from the boss himself. With a wave of his hand, he dismissed Josuke. Taking a letter opener, he severed the seal and opened it. But instead of the ornate writing he was used to, it was something a bit rougher. It wasn't Gato's handwriting. The letter went as such. To the clan head of Konoha, you are requested to come to the Land of Waves immediately. It is of utmost importance that you arrive without delay. This is the boss's orders. At the bottom, it was signed, with permission of Gato, Waraji. Kurama had not seen Waraji in a long time, since he had personally kicked his butt in the warehouse. Now he received a letter from him, under Gato's request. What was going on? Kurama stood and grabbed his weapon and a coat. He stepped out and told Josuke that he was in charge until he returned, and to keep the business running smoothly. Kurama stepped outside and began to make his way to the Land of Waves. Kurama found himself walking the same street again as before, a fog permeating the area. He walked to the boss's office where he was stopped by guards. I was summoned to see the boss, he said, trying to get through and even exposing the letter he'd received from Gato. The men looked at each other and nodded. We know. The boss isn't here though. They proceeded to escort Kurama to a hospital. Walking inside, he found that an entire floor of the hospital was sequestered. Doctors from outside of the village were here too. Moving deeper, he heard people talking. They led him to a room and opened the door for him. Entering, he saw a hospital bed and in it was Gato. He looked horrible, weak, sick, bloated. Kurama came closer. The old man opened his eyes. He had a tube in his throat to help him breathe. He was shaky and weak. Kurama knelt down by his side and, as per usual, kissed his hand to show that he was still his boss's subordinate. In the past, as they had just started their business deal, Kurama was just waiting for a moment to betray Gato. But now, after everything they'd been through, Kurama owed a lot to him for what he had done for him and his group. Kurama's loyalty was unshakable. He indeed had become the father that Kurama had never known. A rocky start, but once they were past that, Gato displayed that as cruel as he could be, he was also very compassionate, especially to those loyal to him. What he was looking at now, it angered him greatly. Boss, what happened to you? Gato struggled to reach for a pad of paper and a pen. Kurama walked around the side and grabbed it for him. He brought it to Gato, where the elderly man began to write out what happened. New gang, showed up in Kiri, engaged, slaughtered. Kurama read it out. They got what they deserved then, if this is what they did to you. Gato's expression slightly changed as his throat let out a dry gasp. He wrote something more. No, we were slaughtered. Kurama's eyes narrowed. Who were they? Gato then spelled out 4 characters. Akatsuki. Kurama read them. Akatsuki? He gripped the side of the bed tightly. I'll destroy them for you. Gato shook his head. Do not engage, he wrote. Too dangerous. A doctor then walked into the room. Kurama turned back to look at him. The doctor spoke. You must be the godson I was told would be coming. Kurama nodded. What happened to him? The doctor looked at the old man and motioned Kurama to follow him out. Kurama did. The doctor, now out of earshot, began to speak. He was shot approximately 9 times in the back. One of the shots severed his spinal cord. He has no movement from his hips down. Besides that, multiple organs were perforated by the bullets. We've repaired what we can, but as it stands, his strength is... he's an elderly man. Will he live? Kurama asked. The doctor looked away. Kurama gripped the man and pushed him into the wall. Will he live? The doctor, shaken by this sudden violent reaction, spoke. I don't know. The wounds are deep and his body isn't healing like it should. Kurama got really close to the man's face and whispered in his ear. He better live. For better or worse, your life is now linked to his. If he dies, not only will I kill you, but I'll kill your family too. You got that? The doctor, shaking now, barely had enough strength to push up his glasses. Kurama then shouted in his face, Do you got that? At this time, the other members of Gato's men grabbed Kurama and pulled him off the doctor and threw him out of the hospital. You need to take some time to cool off, Kurama, Zori said. You're not the only one who's pissed off, but we need those doctors. Can't have you terrorizing them while you act like an infant. Kurama looked back. Piss off! Zori re-entered the hospital. Kurama began to walk alone, making his way to the nearest bar. He sat down at it. He tapped the bar table twice with his fingers. The bartender would then walk over. We don't serve minors. Kurama looked up at the bartender, who then realized who he was. Except for you, Mr. Uzumaki. We'll serve you all day long. He brought a glass over and poured him a shot. As he went to return the bottle to its original resting place, Kurama stopped him. Leave it. The bartender did as requested and went back to cleaning his glasses. Kurama looked over at the man out of the corner of his eye and tapped his glass gently on the table. The man offered a smile of gratitude as Kurama raised his glass, tipping it in his direction. He then shot it back. After doing so, he sat it down and lifted the bottle to add more to it, but thought the better of it. He pushed his glass out of the way and just took a swig from the bottle. It was strong, 40%. It was a foreign brand of alcohol made from potatoes and other similar things. It was sharp, but by this time Kurama had already grown accustomed to the taste, to the burn. He sighed as he thought about it and what he was going to need to do. He thought about Gato. How was he just laying in that bed, wasting away, having been shot in the back by some new gang sniffing around their turf? To even enter another gang's turf was bad enough, but to shoot someone was an act of war, especially if that person was a patriarch. There were some penalties that could only be paid in blood. This was one of them. He thought about the Akatsuki. Pulling out his phone, he sent out a message to Waraji, telling him to start funneling all information they had about the Akatsuki to him. It was about 3 minutes before he got a response. Waraji responded, "Are you sure that's such a good idea?" Kurama then texted back, "The Akatsuki have just declared war on us. We can't just sit around and let them walk all over us. They've cut into our profits, invaded our turf, and shot our patriarch. If we don't react, it'll make us look weak." Waraji would respond again, but the boss said if anything happens to him, you're in charge. We'll send information shortly. He would then get various documents on the Akatsuki. So far, very little was known. They were highly secretive, but beyond being members of a gang and illicit trade, they were mercenaries. They were of the highest-ranking missing nin in the world. Kurama rolled his head back and let out a sigh. Standing from his seat, he would pull out his wallet. He'd pay for the whole bottle and then drop a tip in the glass for the bartender before leaving. As he walked out, he read a bit more about them and about possible connections they had. One of the things he found was that Orochimaru had at one time been a member of this group. That gave him a lead, so he decided to do some investigating. He would buy out a shop of all its flowers and then tag on the nicest card he could and have it sent to Gato's room along with a myriad of balloons. The card read, "No longer family by word only, but by blood as well. Blood for blood, I will preserve the family." Kurama would then begin making his way home. Gato could only smile seeing these things. "I chose right," he said through a weak voice as he read the card. Kurama would make his way to Orochimaru's old lab. The place was quiet, dank, stale. It had been quite some time since he'd been here. He kept his eyes open. The traps might still be working. It was ironically from here that Kurama had found the weapon now strapped to his hip. It was believed to be the weapon that could end all shinobi according to Orochimaru's work. Kurama kept going deeper. They had taken items of use and trinkets, but they hadn't really had time to look through his papers and other forms of info he had stored. Kurama decided that the best place for him to go would be to the records room. As he walked in, he found rows and rows of file cabinets that seemed to extend on infinitely in every direction. At the center of the room, however, was a single computer. Old and boxy, it looked as if it was the first home PC ever invented. He walked over to it and hit the button that gave it power. Sitting down, he'd begin to look over the contents. He began searching for anything based on the search phrase Akatsuki. Finding a file on them, he opened it up and began to read. He recognized that, according to Orochimaru, they'd been formed in Ame as a peacekeeping corps. That is, until tragedy struck and caused them to lose all hope in the ideal that formed them. They became a rogue mercenary group to which Orochimaru was once a part of, with the primary goal of forming a super weapon to bring the world under their dictatorial rule. To fund this, they were getting into illicit trade, assassinations, and other business that was slowly pulling funds from the Gato company's profits. But what was interesting was Orochimaru's testimony of what the place was like. He said it wasn't too unlike a cult in which the users venerated a leader named Pain as the second sage of 6 paths, the reincarnation of the sage who gave mankind chakra in the first place, and were forced to make sacrifices to an idol known as the demonic statue of the outer path. Orochimaru further explained that the future goals seemed to be gathering the various tailed beasts together and sacrificing them to this statue to awaken some dark god conglomerate of all the tailed beasts. "Did you know about this, Ninetails?" he asked. Naruto responded that he wasn't sure. He knew that the sage did do something to free him from a life of insanity, but he wasn't sure what. He then explained that there was the chance that together they might all reform into this dark beast that they had once been. "Why didn't you tell me that then?" Kurama asked. "I wasn't sure," Naruto said. "I didn't know if that was a fact or just some strange dream I had. Do you tell your men about every dream you have?" It was a fair point, but now with this, he knew that they had some intel on the group. Fitting in a thumb drive, he began to download the information from the file. As he came to a finish, though, he heard something. Readying his weapon, he came around the corner and peeked outside. He saw nothing, but heard more rustling down the line. Going further, he peeked around the corner and found 2 members wearing the trademarked black cloaks with the red cloud. Akatsuki members. It was Deidara and Sasori. Kurama was so peeved he could hardly contain himself. With Deidara's head turned, Kurama came around the side and emptied 2 shots into the back of it, putting Deidara down immediately. He then looked down at his weapon. Wow, it really is the end of all shinobi. Sasori turned around. He was a creepy, grotesque-looking man, hunched over as if walking on all fours. He opened his mouth and wire shot out of it. Kurama barely dodged. He peeked around again and began to fire into the face of Sasori. However, the bullets seemed to bounce off. Okay, this guy isn't going to be easily destroyed by bullets. Any ideas, Fox? Naruto, put on the spot, then spoke. Try this. I'll give you some of my chakra directly. It should be even stronger than version 2. Suddenly, Kurama was coated in a golden chakra. What's this, a chakra cloak? I feel strong. Good, because you are, Naruto said. I don't need to tell you about this guy. You know him? Kurama asked. No, I don't, but I can sense things and I'm telling you that something isn't right about him. He doesn't feel like he's totally alive. It's like I'm looking at a living puppet. But despite that, there is a spark emanating from him. I can't explain it. I think he's mostly fake, but part of him's real. Attack that part. Kurama nodded. All right. With his power increased, he tried to get around the cord. Recalling his training he'd received from Haku, Kurama drew close and kicked Sasori as hard as he could. This sent him flying into the wall and smashed him. But to the horror of Kurama, Sasori had a second form hiding underneath, and this one seemed more mobile. There, Naruto shouted. What? Kurama asked. There, on his chest. See the area with the kanji for scorpion? That's the center of where I can feel his energy. That's good enough for me. Kurama reloaded his weapon. He raised his gun and fired. Each bullet was coated in a layer of chakra, which increased their piercing power. They struck the puppet and did damage to Sasori's surprise. Interesting. It seems that I can't let you shoot me anymore. Your bullets are finally a threat. Sasori displayed a blade of his own from his arm. Kurama charged him, firing bullets. Sasori's wire seemed to catch most of them, but the ones that got by were deflected by his blade. It's useless. Sasori swung the cord around to wound and poison Kurama, but he jumped over it and slid under for a second time. He reloaded as he kicked Sasori's bladed arm away. From this position, he fired upward, blowing the face off the puppet, impairing Sasori's ability to see or speak. The wire flailed blindly, attempting to strike Kurama down, but Kurama gave distance. Standing up, he poured his chakra into his gun, giving it a golden hue. He fired off 4 rounds into the area that was marked. Blood spurted from the area as the puppet fell back. Kurama drew closer as the puppet was barely moving anymore. Creepy bastard. He unloaded the clip into the heart. By this time, it stopped moving. Kurama stepped away from it. That was for what you did to the boss. He turned and began to leave. He took the information back with him to Konoha. There, he began receiving more info about the Akatsuki. This info told him about their recent actions, the reason they were spread through so many different areas. They were killing Jinchuriki and taking their tailed beasts. From what Kurama gathered, they had already taken 8 of 9. This meant that there was only 1 left for them to take, and with this knowledge, he clued Danzo into the matter, letting him know that there was likely to be an attack very soon on Konoha that, when decided, would determine the fate of the world. With this new information, Konoha would begin to prepare for the attack. It was at this time that Kurama received a new letter. It, too, had the sigil of Gato on it. He looked at it closely, too afraid to open it. Josuke looked at him. Is everything all right, boss? Kurama looked at him. I don't want to open this letter, he said. Why? Kurama looked at Josuke and answered his question. Because I'm afraid of what it'll say. Kurama sat for a moment longer, thinking about it. He then reached for his letter opener and cut the seal. Within was a scrawling of words. Simple words that were passionate and emotional. Simple as it seemed, it was all that was needed. They seemed to have been drawn fast. Perhaps multiple of these letters had been written out. Whatever the purpose of the sloppy handwriting, the words were all that mattered. The boss is dead. Kurama tossed the letter on his desk with a groan. Damn it. What is it? Josuke asked. Kurama looked up. Gato died from complications to his wounds. Josuke stood there silently for a moment. What does that mean for us? Kurama thought about it. It means that I'm now the sole patriarch of the family, and I've inherited his business. Josuke thought about it for a second. But isn't that good? For us, I mean? We get to reallocate profits. This is what we wanted all along when joining this faction, right? A chance to grow. You're now the most powerful mobster in the world. Shouldn't you be happy? Kurama thought about it. Rightly, according to how he felt when he joined, he would have prayed for a day like this, but not now. It seemed in the time he had known Gato had gotten under his skin and become the fulfillment of a role. He was a father figure. In the past, I would have, Kurama said, but now all I feel is sorrow. He mentored me all those years. I realized under him that there was so much to running a business that I didn't know. We grew close. He became like a father to me, I his son. We even referred to each other as such. It's why I inherited this company at all. So, Josuke looked down. I'm sorry, boss. I spoke out of turn without caring about how you felt. I understand what it's like to lose someone you love. I know the hurt. Kurama looked up at him. He walked around the desk and gave Josuke a hug and a brotherly kiss upon the cheek. "We all felt your pain, Josuke. You survived and so did I. I'll survive this too." Looking at the brother he had since the beginning, he smiled. "Come, sit with me." He pulled the chair back and let Josuke sit down. Kurama walked around his desk and opened a special drawer. He pulled out a bottle of half-drunk scotch. It was premium stuff. Opening it, he pulled out 2 glasses. He poured them both and presented one to Josuke. Josuke took a sip, as did Kurama, getting comfortable in his chair. "It's hard to believe it's been 8 years since we started this group," Kurama said. "And how long have we known each other?" Josuke asked. Kurama thought back. "Maybe 9 years. When we had nothing, we still had each other. And when we got tired of being cast-outs, we decided that the only people who'd be friends with people like us were others who had nobody. That was the first time I ever truly felt like I had a place to belong." Josuke laughed. "To be honest, it feels even longer than 8 years, considering we're only 16. "Feels like a lifetime," Kurama said. "I guess that's why losing Yusuke hurt so bad. We knew him for our whole lives," Josuke tacked on. "You actually did know him your whole life, long before you met me," Kurama said. Kurama then looked up toward the ceiling. "Sometimes I look back on those days and wonder, was it I who took you in, or you guys who took me in? I think you guys took me in and just told me to lead you." Kurama chuckled. Yusuke mirrored the laugh. Kurama then sighed. "We're a criminal empire now, filthy rich and immensely powerful. Looking back, I'd trade it all away just to have Yusuke back, but time doesn't work that way. We can't go back now." "We avenged Yusuke," Josuke said. He then raised a glass. "Let's avenge Mr. Gato next." Kurama raised his glass, and as if summoning it with their mere words, there was the sound of an explosion in the distance. Kurama stood and looked out the window. "It's the Akatsuki. Lock down the compound." Yusuke agreed and ran out. He began issuing orders to Butch and to Haku and Zabuza. The 3 of them began to run off to prepare their men for battle. Kurama, meanwhile, was loading his weapon. They were coming for him. It didn't take long for 2 shinobi to enter the grounds. One possessed a large sword, and the other was an Uchiha. Zabuza and Haku would step out to face them, as would the rest of the men. Kurama as well would step out, last of all. "You picked the wrong group, pals," Kurama said. He aimed his pistol at Itachi's skull and fired. Itachi would simply stare at the bullets and incinerate them with his Amaterasu. Kisame stood there and looked to Zabuza. "It's been a long time, Demon of the Mist," Kisame said. "Not long enough, Shark Boy." Kisame looked at Haku. "And who's this, your little boyfriend?" Zabuza pointed his blade at Kisame. "I'll introduce you to mine if you introduce me to yours." Itachi looked over. "We're not here for small talk, Kisame. We're here to deal with them." It was then that Itachi revealed from behind his robe a katana. He looked down at it. "I haven't had to use this in many, many years." He looked up. "The last time I did, it was a massacre. History seems to be caught in a cycle." Itachi stepped forward. The men rushed him as Kurama watched. Itachi swung his blade and cut down quite a few of them. But when it seemed that he might be overwhelmed, suddenly a flaming orange chakra avatar rose from the ground. Those closest to him found themselves coated in black flame. They started to make distance around him, but he revealed a chakra blade to cut them down with. It seemed none of them could get through his Susanoo. "Give me power, Fox," Kurama demanded. Without a choice, Naruto obliged. He began to share chakra with Kurama, giving him access to his Nine-Tails chakra mode. Kurama launched forward and began to attack. His fist struck against the Susanoo's shield, but nothing happened. The Susanoo pushed him back. Kurama stumbled back and raised his pistol, firing at it. The bullets bounced off the mirror and proceeded to ricochet into some of his nearby men. Kurama roared as his chakra began to burn brighter. He was unsure how to get around that Susanoo. "Why don't you come out of your shell and fight me head on? Or are you afraid you'll lose?" Itachi stood there. "I have one mission, and it's not to preserve my honor." The Susanoo swung at him once again. Meanwhile, Butch and Josuke were attempting to aid Haku and Zabuza against Kisame. The 2 swordsmen traded blows faster than the eye could see. As Haku and the others were drawing closer, Zabuza demanded that the 2 stay back. This was a duel between 2 legendary swordsmen. Zabuza would do it himself. Kisame's blade growled as its open maw produced a tongue to lick its sharp teeth. Kisame's blade clashed with Zabuza's further. As they stepped back, Kisame smiled. "Why don't we settle this the way of the samurai?" Zabuza looked down. "Iai Jutsu." Kisame nodded. He then flipped back a little ways and lowered his sword to the ground. Zabuza did the same. They waited until a distant explosion marked the start. The 2 rushed at each other quickly with a swing of their blades. A moment passed after this. Both men stood silently, waiting to see who would go down. Suddenly, Zabuza realized something. He couldn't feel his feet anymore. He'd been bisected. As his torso fell back, his legs fell forward. Kisame walked over to him and looked down. He took up the executioner's blade. "You always were a step behind me." He then used the weapon to sever Zabuza's head. Haku cried out for him before furiously releasing a wave of icy wind. He began to throw senbon at him as Butch and Josuke threw their shuriken. Using the wide blade of the executioner, Kisame shielded himself and walked forward despite the wind. Getting there, he cut Haku down before moving on to the next two. Butch was too slow to get out of the way and was the next to go down. Josuke was quicker and took a step back. Kurama! Kurama looked over to see Josuke in a tight spot. Josuke! He shouted. He rushed over to help him but was struck by Itachi, sending him flying. Josuke turned and tried to run, but before he could, Kisame threw the executioner's blade, splitting Josuke down the middle lengthwise. Kurama sat up and cried out to him, "No!" His rage building up, he would suddenly, without knowing, channel a tailed beast ball. He fired it straight into Itachi's Susanoo, shattering it. As Itachi was left in a smoking crater, Kurama rushed at Kisame with all his strength, striking out. Kisame caught the strike with his blade. He'd then proceed to strike Kurama in the stomach. In most cases, this would cut a man in half, but because of the chakra mode, it simply carved a deep laceration into his muscle. Kurama cried out. He grabbed the blade, though, in his hand, stopping Kisame from pulling back. Kurama raised his pistol to Kisame's forehead, but Kisame grabbed it and pushed it to the side. In his rage, Kurama formed a second-tailed beast ball and launched it point blank. The explosion was magnificent. There was nothing left of Kisame after this, but the force of the strike was too much, and it blew Kurama back as well. He hit the side of the mansion hard. He fell out of his form. The battle seemed to be over, but he was too wounded. Bleeding, having lost all of his forces, including his last surviving friends, he rose to his feet. He began to stumble his way inside. He was unaware that someone was moving in the rubble behind him. Kurama stumbled into the office where he had last spoke with Josuke. He looked at the wounds on his body. They were nothing compared to the wounds on his heart. He kicked the chair Josuke had been sitting in away. Sitting down in his own chair, he poured himself another glass. He looked around and tossed his gun on the table to his left and began to look outside. To his right was the letter reminding him that the boss had been killed. Looking down into his drink, he saw not the reflection of a powerful victor, but of a man who had lost everything. He was so enraged by the actions of the Akatsuki in stealing everything that was his. He wanted to go there and personally kill the rest of them, but he no longer had the strength or ability. He just was going to wait and hope that Danzo could beat them. He gripped his head, clutching his hair in defeat. The loss was too much. Tears spilled into his scotch as he began to lose control of his emotions. As he looked into his drink, he heard a voice behind him. "You have nowhere else to go." Kurama's head raised up from his drink and turned around. It was Itachi. "You here to capture me? Take me back to sacrifice to your dark god?" Itachi shook his head. "This may come as a surprise to you, but I am on the side of Konoha." Kurama was confused. "What? If that's the case, then why the hell did you kill all my men? My friends?" Itachi took a step forward. Kurama grabbed his gun and aimed it in his assailant's direction. Itachi looked at him without emotion. "You know, joining the Akatsuki wasn't originally my desire. I was forced to after I destroyed my clan. You see, my clan was preparing to destroy Konoha's leadership in a coup. I didn't wish to destroy them either, but I did. You know why? Because I was told I could save something if I did. Sasuke." Kurama was confused. "Sasuke?" Itachi nodded. "Sasuke was the thing that mattered most to me, and you mutilated him." Kurama cocked his gun. Suddenly, Itachi's Sharingan caught him before he could pull the trigger. "I was originally planning to protect you, but upon seeing what you did to my brother, I realized that all I really have to do is keep the Nine Tails out of their grasp." Itachi looked around. "Let me tell you what happened. Kisame and I attacked and were nearly defeated by you, as proven by my tattered garments, but we managed to kill everyone. And you, having lost everything worth fighting for, decided to take the coward's way out. By the time I woke up, it was too late. You had already shot yourself." Suddenly, Kurama noticed that his hand began moving against his will. The barrel was pushed against his temple. Kurama, by this time, accepted his fate. "In the end," he said, "we all pay for our crimes, don't we?" Itachi took a deep breath as the sound of a gunshot rang out. Leaving behind the corpse of Kurama, he exited the mansion. Konoha, despite its best efforts, was not able to stop the Akatsuki. They took out some of its members, but in the end, Konoha was obliterated, and even Danzo was destroyed. But they had failed to capture the Nine Tails. Itachi took responsibility, saying he was too late to stop Kurama from killing himself. Only he knew that it was out of vengeance. This bought him a few years to come up with a plan to stop them from getting the Nine Tails, but before he could enact it, he died from an illness he had contracted far earlier. With him out of the way, nothing could stop the Akatsuki from capturing Naruto after his reformation. Despite the fox's pleas, they added him to the Geto statue and awakened the Ten Tails. With this done, Obito made his move and killed Pain, taking his Rinnegan to control the Ten Tails. But this didn't last long, as he too would be betrayed by Zetsu, who would use him as a vector to awaken Kaguya. Kaguya would then proceed to use the infinite Tsukiyomi to drain the world of all of its chakra before abandoning it to her own personal dimension, where she would then seek to begin the process anew on another world. Well, I made myself sad. It's sad to think that such a fate would befall our heroes, but considering that Sasuke is dead by this time and Kurama simply isn't agreeable enough to really be much of a help against the Akatsuki, such a fate is likely. Kurama is a very emotional fellow, and the darkness in his heart festers. Hatred begets hatred, and that is what all of this boiled down to. And because Kurama couldn't let go, and because Itachi couldn't let go, the world suffered. A real bummer of an ending, but I hope it's one that you all liked. If so, be sure to tell us about it in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified when more content like this drops. And while you're waiting, could I offer you some of these videos? I'm sure you'll enjoy them. Until next time, peace.